Need to check the list of used names before writing. The forbidden names are Dave, Karen, Frank, Ray, Curtis, Brandon, Nathan, Lydia, Constance, Georgia, Scott, Mitch, Miles, Theo, Paige, Harriet, Victor, Harold, Joel Mercer, Diane, Elaine, Eli, Marcus, Renee, Olaine, Marcus, Renee, Owen, Patricia, Craig, Sandra, Derek, Wendy. I want to tell you something I've never actually said out loud in one sitting. Not to my brother, not to my therapist, not even to my wife, not all of it, not in the right order. But I've been sitting on this for a long time, and I think it's time I finally let it out. My name's not important. What's important is that for 11 years, I was married to a woman I genuinely believed was my best friend. Her name was Tara. And I loved her the way you love someone when you're 26 and stupid and certain that the feeling in your chest is enough to hold a whole life together. We met at a mutual friend's cookout in Columbus, Ohio. Late August, one of those evenings where the air is still warm, but you can just barely feel fall starting to lean in. She was standing by the cooler arguing with somebody about whether Springsteen was overrated. I walked over just to listen. She had this confidence that wasn't loud. It was just solid. Like she already knew where she stood on everything, and she wasn't asking for your opinion, but she wasn't dismissing yours either. I thought that was the most attractive thing I'd ever seen in a person. We dated for 2 years, got married in 2009 in a small ceremony outside Granville. My mom cried. Her dad gave a toast that made everyone laugh. It was one of the best days of my life. I'm not going to pretend otherwise just because of how things ended. For the first several years, we were good. Really good. I was working in commercial insurance, which sounds boring because it is, but it paid well and I was good at it. Tara had gone back to school for her MBA and landed a position at a regional marketing firm. We bought a house in Westerville. We had a dog named Chester. We talked about kids, not urgently, but the way you talk about things you're both quietly looking forward to. I don't know exactly when things started to shift. That's the honest answer. It wasn't one moment. It was more like the way a room gets cold. You don't notice it until you're already shivering. She started working late, which wasn't unusual for her field, so I didn't flag it. She started being on her phone more, which again, she'd always been a little attached to it. She stopped initiating anything between us. But she had a way of making me feel like I was the one being clingy if I brought it up. She was good at that. Taking the thing that was bothering you and rotating it slightly so it became your fault for noticing. There was one evening I remember specifically. I'd made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and a salad, and I'd lit a couple of candles because I was trying to do something nice. She came home an hour late, looked at the table, said, "You didn't have to do all this," in a tone that meant something closer to, "I wish you hadn't." Then she took her phone to the bedroom and said she had emails to finish. I sat at that table by myself and ate and told myself I was reading into things. The person who finally made me stop telling myself that was my buddy Garrett. We've been friends since our mid-20s, met through a rec softball league, and stayed close the way some friendships just stick. Garrett worked in IT security, which meant he noticed things. He was at our house for a Super Bowl party in February, and he pulled me aside while Tara was in the kitchen and said, "Hey, is everything okay with you two?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "She's been texting since halftime, hasn't watched a single play, and she keeps tilting her phone away when she walks through the room." I told him he was imagining things. He gave me a look and dropped it. But I didn't sleep that night. I want to be clear about something, because the comments on stories like this always say the guy should have just grabbed the phone. I understand that impulse, but Tara and I had an understanding, or I thought we did, that our phones were private. I'd never gone through hers. She'd never gone through mine. That was a thing we'd said to each other early on, and I'd held to it. So instead of grabbing the phone, I did something that felt more like me. I started paying attention. I paid attention to the mileage on her car versus what her drive to work actually required. I paid attention to the credit card statements, which I handled since I was better with the finances. I paid attention to the way she talked about her colleague Philip. He came up a lot. Always in context, always appropriately, but a lot. Philip thinks the campaign needs a different angle. Philip's been pulling extra hours too. Philip actually has a similar take on that. I didn't say anything. I just listened. I started keeping a small notebook, not because I was planning anything, but because I needed to feel like I wasn't losing my mind. The thing that broke it open happened in April. I came home early from a conference in Cleveland. It ended a day ahead of schedule, and I didn't bother calling ahead because I figured I'd surprise her, maybe take her to dinner. I pulled into the driveway and her car was there, which made sense. There was also a second car parked on the street in front of our house. I didn't recognize it. I went inside. The house was quiet. I called out her name. She appeared at the top of the stairs with wet hair and a look on her face that she'd covered in about half a second. She said she'd just gotten out of the shower. She said the neighbor's kid had stopped by earlier asking about Chester. He'd gotten loose apparently. She said a lot of things very quickly. I asked whose car was out front. She said she didn't know, probably someone visiting the Meltons down the street. I looked out the window. The car was gone. I didn't push it that night. I went upstairs. I unpacked my bag. I took a shower myself and stood under the water for a long time thinking. When I came out, she was on her laptop at the desk, and she asked how the conference was. I told her it was fine. She said she was glad I was home. She kissed me on the cheek. I lay in the dark next to her for 3 hours before I fell asleep. Next morning, she left for work and I called Garrett. I told him everything. All of it. The mileage, the credit card charges for restaurants I'd never been to, the car in the street, the wet hair, the speed of her explanations. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" I said I wanted to know the truth. He said he could help me with that, and that I should think carefully about whether I actually wanted it. Because once you know something, you can't unknow it. I told him I already knew. I just needed the proof. He helped me set up a basic keystroke logger on the home desktop, which we both used. That felt wrong to me. I want to be honest about that. It felt like a violation of something. But I also thought about that dinner table and the candles and the look on her face, and I kept going. Within 2 weeks, I had enough. The emails were with Philip. They'd been going on for at least 8 months. They weren't vague. There was a trip to Asheville in November that I'd thought was a work retreat. There were weeknight meetings that weren't meetings. There was a thread where she said, and I'm going to paraphrase this because I still feel it in my chest, that she'd been thinking for a long time about what she actually wanted her life to look like, and that she wasn't sure I was in the picture the way I used to be, that she felt like she'd grown into someone different, and she wasn't sure I'd grown with her. Philip had responded with, "You deserve to stop settling." I printed everything. I put the printouts in a folder. I put the folder in my car. I drove to Garrett's house and sat in his kitchen, and he made coffee and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Okay, what do you want the next chapter to look like?" I said I wanted out. But I wanted to be smart about it. Here's where I think a lot of men in my situation would have gone straight to the confrontation, and I understand why. The anger's enormous. It wants somewhere to go. But I'd read enough, and I'd listened to enough people who'd been through divorce to know that what you say and do in those first weeks sets the stage for everything that follows. So instead of blowing everything up that day, I called a lawyer first. Her name was Beverly. She'd been practicing family law in Franklin County for over 20 years. She had the kind of calm that comes from having seen everything twice. I told her the situation. She told me what I needed to gather before I made any moves. Bank records, retirement accounts, the deed to the house, documentation of assets, evidence of the affair which I already had, though Ohio is a no-fault state, so its legal weight was limited. She told me to stop making any large purchases and to not do anything that could be framed as abandonment. I spent 6 weeks doing exactly what Beverly said. I opened a separate checking account. I made copies of every financial document in the house and kept them at Garrett's. I documented everything I could. I did all of this while sleeping next to my wife every night, while having dinner with her, while pretending that the version of our marriage I believed in still existed. That was the hardest part. Not the anger, the performance. I chose a Sunday afternoon in May to have the conversation. I'd thought carefully about the timing. She didn't have work to flee to. There was nowhere pressing to be. I waited until we'd had lunch and the dishes were done, and Chester was out in the yard. Then I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, and I put the folder in front of her. I said, "I need you to look at what's in there." She looked at me for a moment before she opened it. And in that moment, I watched her face do something complicated, like she was calculating how much I might know. She opened the folder. She looked at the first page. She closed it. She said, "How long have you had this?" I said, "Long enough." She didn't cry right away. She asked how I got it. I told her it wasn't important. She said she was sorry, and I could tell she meant it, but I could also tell she was sorry in the way people are sorry when they're sorry they got caught, rather than sorry they did it. There's a difference. After 11 years, I could read the difference. She said maybe we could try counseling. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said Philip didn't mean anything. I said, "He told you that you deserve to stop settling. Does that sound like nothing to you?" She went quiet. I told her I'd already spoken to an attorney. I told her I had copies of all the financial documents. I told her I wasn't interested in a fight, I just wanted to do this cleanly and with some dignity. I pushed a second folder across the table. Inside was a separation agreement that Beverly had helped me draft. Tara looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. She said, "You've been planning this." I said, "Yes." She said, "How long have you just been pretending?" I said, "About as long as you have." The divorce took 8 months. It wasn't ugly. It was sad, which is almost worse. We'd built a real life together, and dismantling it felt like knocking down a house you'd lived in for a decade. The dog custody arrangement alone took 3 separate conversations. We sold the house in August. I moved into an apartment in the short north. She kept most of the furniture. I didn't fight her on it. I wanted clean. I won't pretend those first months were anything other than rough. I was 41 years old, newly single, living in an apartment with basically a mattress, a couch, and too much time to think. I went through a stretch where I was eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week and watching documentaries until 2 in the morning. Garrett would call and check on me. My brother Louis drove up from Cincinnati twice. My mom called every Sunday and pretended she was just calling to chat. I went back to therapy. I'd done it briefly in my 30s and hadn't gotten much out of it, but this time it helped. My therapist, a guy named Dr. Albright, who had the energy of a man who had genuinely heard everything, helped me understand something that took a while to land. He said the grief I was feeling wasn't just about Tara. It was about the version of myself that had existed inside that marriage. The man who'd lit the candles and made the pasta and believed the feeling in his chest was enough. That version of me had to be mourned too. That took a while to understand, but once I did, something started to loosen. About a year after the divorce was finalized, Garrett and his wife had a small dinner party. I almost didn't go. I was in one of those moods where the couch and the documentaries felt more appealing than real human contact. But he pushed, and I went. Her name was June. She was a physical therapist, originally from Knoxville, one of those people who is immediately warm without being overwhelming. She was there with a friend, and she laughed at something I said early in the evening, and it was such a genuine laugh, not polite, not performative, just real, that I found myself actually trying to be funny for the rest of the night just to hear it again. We talked until the other guests had mostly filtered out. She'd been through her own version of a difficult ending. Not the same as mine, but enough that we had a shared language around it. She understood the specific exhaustion of being in a relationship where you slowly stopped recognizing yourself. We had coffee that week, then dinner, then more dinners. It moved slowly, which was right. We were both people who needed slow. I need to tell you about what happened with Tara and Philip, because the story isn't finished there. About 4 months after the divorce, Garrett called me with something he'd heard through a mutual contact. Tara had apparently told several people that the divorce was primarily because I'd been emotionally checked out for years, that I'd been cold, unavailable, that she'd tried, but I hadn't been willing to do the work. She was building a narrative, and Philip was very much a part of her life publicly now. They were posting on social media. She had a life that looked from the outside like it had been waiting for her all along. I'm not going to lie and say that didn't sting. It did. There's something particular about being cast as the villain in a story you know the actual facts of. I had the folder, I had the emails, I knew what "you deserve to stop settling" meant. But I also knew that fighting her narrative publicly wasn't going to give me anything I actually needed, so I let it go. I focused on the work in front of me. I got promoted that winter, a senior position I'd been passed over for twice before. I started running again, something I'd given up somewhere in year 7 of the marriage. I went to Louis's kids' baseball games. I let myself be in my actual life instead of mourning the one I'd thought I'd have. June and I moved in together, 18 months after that dinner party. It was not a dramatic decision. It was quiet and right and felt like something that made sense. She had a cat named Bernard who did not care for me initially but has since come around. Then, about 2.5 years after the divorce, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was someone I'd met once briefly, a woman who'd worked with Tara, and she said she had something she thought I deserved to know. I asked her why she was calling me and not just letting it go. She said because she'd watched what Tara had done, and how she'd talked about me afterward, and it hadn't sat right with her. What she told me was this: Philip had left Tara, had done it relatively abruptly, had met someone else, had ended things in a way that by her account had blindsided Tara completely. The relationship that had cost us our marriage had lasted about a year and a half after Tara was free to actually have it. I sat with that for a while. I want to be honest about how it landed. There was a part of me, I'm not proud of this, that felt something that I can only describe as relief. Not joy, not satisfaction exactly, more like a confirmation. Like the universe had said out loud that I hadn't been crazy, that what had happened to me was real. But mostly I felt tired of the whole thing. I thanked her for calling. I hung up. I went back to the kitchen where June was making dinner and I told her about the call. She put down what she was doing. She looked at me and said, "How are you feeling?" I said honestly, "I think I'm okay." And I was. There's one more thing. A small thing, but it matters to me. About a year ago, Tara and I crossed paths at a grocery store in Dublin, completely by accident. We saw each other across the produce section, and there was a moment where we both had the choice to pretend we hadn't. She walked over. She looked tired in a way I recognized, the kind that isn't about sleep. She said hi. I said hi. She asked how I was doing, and I told her well. Genuinely. She said she was glad. She seemed like she meant it. She said, "You always had your life together more than I give you credit for." I didn't know what to do with that. I just said, "I hope you're doing okay." She nodded. We went our separate ways through the store. I saw her once more from a distance near the checkout, and then she was gone. I drove home thinking about the 26-year-old version of me standing by a cooler in August arguing about Springsteen. He didn't know it was coming, but I don't think he'd be embarrassed by how the man he became handled it. He'd feel the losses. He'd grieve what he thought he had. And then he'd get up and build something real. That's what I did. June and I got married last spring in a small ceremony outside Columbus. My mom cried again. Garrett gave a toast. Bernard the cat stayed home and remained indifferent to the whole thing, which felt appropriate. If you're watching this and you're in the middle of something like what I went through, here's what I'd tell you. Don't blow it up before you're ready. Get quiet. Get smart. Get a good lawyer. Grieve the version of yourself that believed it was all real, because that grief is legitimate and it deserves to be honored. And then, when you're ready, let the next chapter begin. It will be better than you think. I've thought a lot about what actually went wrong. Not just with Tara, not just with the marriage, but with the version of me that let it go on so long without saying anything. And I keep coming back to the same uncomfortable truth. I knew, not everything, not the specifics, but I knew something was off for a long time before I was willing to look at it directly. And I chose the comfort of not knowing over the pain of finding out. That's not a small thing to admit. It took me a long time to stop framing it as loyalty and start calling it what it was, which was fear. Fear of being right. Fear of what being right would cost me. Here's what I've come to understand about the way things unfolded. The outcome wasn't decided the day I confronted Tara. It was decided in the months before that, in the quiet decisions I made, to be careful, to be prepared, to handle it with some intelligence instead of just raw emotion. Garrett told me once to think about what I actually wanted the next chapter to look like before I blew anything up. That question probably saved me a year of legal and financial chaos. Because when you're in pain, your instinct is to make the other person feel it too. And that instinct, if you follow it blindly, hands them the leverage, the patience required to do what I did, to sit across from someone at dinner knowing what I knew, to keep my voice level, to keep building my case instead of throwing it all on the table the moment I had it. That didn't come naturally to me. I had to choose it every single day, and I don't say that to sound strong. I say it because I want to be honest about how hard it was. There were nights I nearly undid all of it. But the intelligence part, the knowing when to move part, that's what changed the outcome. Not anger, not the folder, not the evidence, not Beverly and her 20 years of family law. What changed the outcome was deciding that I wanted to come out of this with my dignity and my finances and my future intact, and then making every decision in service of that instead of in service of the feeling. And what happened to Philip and Tara after, the relationship that cost me my marriage lasting barely a year and a half, I won't pretend I didn't feel something about that. I did, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like confirmation that certain things carry their own weight. You don't have to do anything about it. The choices people make have a way of compounding over time, for better or worse, for everyone involved. What I know now is this. June isn't a consolation prize. She's not what I got after I lost something. She's what became possible when I stopped holding on to something that had already ended. That distinction matters to me. If I could go back and say one thing to the man sitting alone at that dinner table with the candles he'd lit and the pasta getting cold, I'd tell him to write it down, get a lawyer, and trust that the life on the other side of this is worth building carefully. It is. I'm in it now, and it is